So my guess is most people coming to ride this insane race are people who are really fucking crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Hey, how you doing, YouTube? So it's been a little while since I posted. Was having some difficulty coming up with some ideas for a video. I'm into winter riding now, so I'm going to post some riding footage. But I thought what I would do is put together a little recap of the race season and go through each race and kind of let you know what I thought about each race, the differences between each of the races that I did, some of my preferences, how they were set up, maybe throw in some tidbits and some lessons learned for new racers. So let's get into it. So the first race of the season was the Walton XC. Now, interesting for this Ontario or Off-Road Ontario XC race was held the same weekend as one of their big national level events. I think it was the Triple Crown Series, if I'm not mistaken. So it was a pretty cool weekend, lots of people around, and it was the first race of the season after a slow year the year before, so there was a big turnout. Now this was my first race ever on a dirt bike. It was my first time on a motocross track. It was my first time racing, so there was a lot of things I learned here. And Big Iron Moto and his family were nice enough to show me the ropes. I stayed over at their place the night before because it was a bit of a drive for me, and we headed here the next morning. So the Walton XC race, as you can see, took place in Walton on the MX track with a mix of on-track and single-track riding. This race, as far as the XCs go, for speed, it was fast. It wasn't the fastest XC race, but it was definitely fast. The track portion, what I would say about this one was it was a little bit more unforgiving than some of the other races I'll talk about. Some of the jumps, did have some step-ups and some gaps in between if you really wanted to be able to clean them, or you could just slow roll them the way that I did. When you got into the trees, the single track was actually fairly tight, and it was the great equalizer, and I really appreciated this race for that because the MX guys, although killed us, those of us who are not MX guys on the track, we were able to make up some time in the woods. So I thought this was a really good race for kind of evening the playing field out. Again, being a race in novice, it was fast, but it wasn't the fastest race of the season. Drop gate start like you saw, and it was a good time. The next race of the season was Gopher Dunes. Now, Gopher Dunes, what can I say about Gopher Dunes? Gopher Dunes was fast. It was an extremely fast race for A, somebody who this was their second race of their life, and B, this was now my second time on an MX track. Now, what I would say about the MX track is the track that they use for the XC race, at least this year, was very forgiving. So you'll see in the videos there was some whoops which were interesting. You'll see I almost lose it here at the beginning over the whoops. I get a little bit hairy going over them. But the jumps that they included, there was no gap jumps. They were all big tabletops. They were a lot of fun. It was my first time ever actually clearing a jump. And these are the types of jumps that I would like to practice on for obvious reasons. But it was a hoot. The MX portion of this XC was really fun. Now, when you got into the woods on this race, though, very different than Walton. So Walton was actual single track. The woods portion, for the most part, in Gopher Dunes was double track, and it was fast. So you'll see some of the guys in the footage. I mean, even in the woods, they're taking these turns like they're on the MX track because there was a lot of room, there was a lot of speed. The turns were rutted. So knowing how to take those types of turns like you would on an MX track made you a much faster rider in the woods. The other thing I would note is Gopher Dunes, when it gets wet, turns into a nasty track. And that's fun too, because that becomes a bit of an equalizer in and of itself. But the afternoon classes got hit with rain, and this one was nasty. You can see lots of videos from this year on how that turned out. So a little bit of single track, but very fast. And I can't remember what the average speed was, but I remember Big Iron Moto telling me before we hit this one, like, be prepared because it's really fast, and it didn't disappoint. So the next race in the series was Chloe's Kingdom. This one was a little bit closer to home. It was a double header, so we had a race on Saturday and a race on Sunday. Both counted for points towards the Off-Road Ontario XC series, and that's something to note, because when you look at the terrain here, very, very different. No MX track. Looked very different than the first two races. You would almost be forgiven to think that this was more of an enduro race, or maybe something like a sprint enduro, but it was definitely part of the XC series. So I can't remember exactly how long the laps were. They were probably anywhere between 10 and 11 kilometers, if I'm not mistaken. And you just basically lapped for the 2-hour interval the same way you did at the previous races of Walton and Gopher Dunes. But this one was more up my alley. So a little bit of double track, but this one had some logs. It had a lot of really tight, gnarly single track. Very, very rocky, lots of different terrain, some pretty cool climbs, some very technical sections, and it was a very, very fun weekend. I had a blast on this track, some of my best results from the season. So I placed 3rd and 4th in my class on this track, beating many of the guys who whooped me at the MX focused XC. So Chloe's Kingdom, in my opinion, is a keeper for next year. This is definitely a race I would and will do again, and it was a lot of fun. The other thing I would say while I have time here is tire selection. I've talked about this in my videos before, but for the whole season, because I'm such an enduro focused rider, I had a fatty and I had a big tire, gnarly tire on the back, a 140 series IRC, and those really hampered my performance on the XCs, especially the ones specifically the XC races on the MX tracks. Those fatty tires don't dig in, they don't turn as sharply, and that was a bit of a mistake. Here I ran the same setup, and it was a little bit better, obviously, because of the terrain, but I did end up switching from this tire selection later on in the season. Following Chloe's Kingdom, we had Gullymoore. So this ended up being the last race in the Ontario XC series. So this one, much like Gopher, I thought this was an extremely fast track. Now, the difference being between Gopher is when you got into the woods here, there was much more, single track, a little bit more technical sections than there was at Gopher Dunes, but it was still very fast. And there was a lot of time spent on the MX track per lap. And again, they had some big step ups, some big air, from my perspective, on this track. And, that really provided a little bit of an advantage to anybody with a more MX-oriented riding style. So this one I did not do very well in, and I can't quite remember what my placing was. It was about halfway through the pack. I was very disappointed after this weekend, and I actually don't think I made a video for this race, unfortunately, but I was able to find the footage for this recap. So you can see, still on the MX track here, very fast, and even in the woods, still quite fast. More single track as opposed to double track, but the single track was very fast, and there was only a few spots where it was kind of technical, where a guy like me and my strengths as a rider proved advantageous. The rest of it was basically I need to be quicker, need to be faster. Same tire selection here with a fatty up front and that 140 in the rear, and it continued to prove as a really bad choice for XC racing. You want an MX profile tire on the front. You want something that bites, that can lean, that can turn, that can grip. That's the type of tire selection you want for these races. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't even run a gummy for these races. I'd probably be running for next year a mid-terrain, intermediate terrain type MX tire on the back. Right, so with the Ontario XC series over, we looked to Gaspe. So Big Iron Moto saw that they were going to run a hard enduro, as it was being termed, out of Gaspe in Quebec. It was about a 12-hour drive for us. I made a whole video on this one to include some of the road trip and the preparations. As an experience in general, this was amazing. From the drive to the people there to the organizers to the event itself. The whole thing was just amazing. Met a lot of good people. Made my video. Have a bunch of new subscribers, and I follow and have new followers on Instagram because of this race. And let me tell you, the Quebecers know how to ride dirt bikes, and they know how to put on a hard enduro event. So the footage you're seeing here is from day 2. My GoPro SD card actually crapped out on me on day 2, so I made a video on this one. Most of the footage in that video is from day 1, which was the qualifier. So there was a qualifier on Saturday, and then this was the actual race day based on where you qualified and where you positioned the day before. And this was the race day up the mountain, and a separate mountain, so 2 different mountains. So it was really, really cool. You didn't see the same trail, or it wasn't the same course day after day. It was a qualifier one day and then the race the next day. So you can see here right into single track right away. This was a hard enduro. This is by far the fastest stuff you'll see on any of the footage. It gets much, much more technical. I did not get footage of the most gnarly spots from day 2 specifically. And even day 1, I didn't get a lot of footage because some of the bottlenecks I believe it was called the Python, the trail was called the Python at the top of the Python, were so bad that by the time we actually made it through the first lap, my GoPro had already shut off because the batteries had died and I didn't replace them. But yeah, this is some of the fastest stuff you'll see at Battle of the Prospectors, excuse me. Obviously average speed's much slower than the MX focused XC races, but this was right up my alley and I had a blast. I was in the gold class, so I probably overclassed myself on this one, but I wasn't going to drive 12 hours and skip it on any of the sections. So myself and a few guys from Ontario, Big Iron Moto, made a video as well. We headed down and we hit this one, and then this was a lot of fun. Now this is where an enduro setup for tires really starts to shine. So my back tire, I was running, I don't know, somewhere around 3 or 4 psi. Now I was still running tubeless at this time, and that all the XCs before this I was also running tubeless, and I actually made the switch following this race to Moose's, because my tubeless for some reason on this trip wouldn't hold air. And so in between races I was having little freakouts, refilling them, checking them, seeing if they were going to hold long enough for the 2.5 hours we were out on the track. Lucky enough I made it through the weekend with that setup, but I mean, this was a hard enduro setup for sure. Now I still wouldn't recommend running a fatty tire in a race like this, at least for me I won't. I will still be running an MX profile tire that bites and turns and brakes real hard. I think that's just the best option for racing in general, but a gummy on the back or something with a lot of grip definitely would prove useful. So a lot of rocks, a lot of roots, a lot of climbs, and we're talking massive climbs. I've said this before, 1,000, 2,000 feet. I think on day 2, Big Iron Moto said that it was something in the neighborhood of 5,000 feet worth of elevation change. So Battle of Prospectors, big thumbs up, and we'll see you guys next year. Right, so after Battle of the Prospectors, of course, we come back to Ontario and we hit the Corduroy Enduro. So absolutely outstanding event. What I would say about all the races I've covered so far, those types of races, and you'll forgive me if I don't know the proper name of how the race is conducted, but essentially all those other races, to include Battle of the Prospectors, was start at the start line, horn blows, you're into the race. 2 hours, 2.5 hours later, you come off of the race, and that is your time. However many laps, whatever position you were in, whatever your time accumulation was, you were racing the whole time from, minute 0 to hour 2.5. Corduroy Enduro was my first experience in a race where there was test sections. So sections with transit sections in between. Over the full 2 days, that included, leaving the start gate, transiting to the first test area, and then hitting a test. So You would roll up on your minute, and it was all controlled by time. You would roll up, your minute would flip on some sort of a flipboard at the start line for that test. They would call your number. You and your group, whether it was 4 or 5 of you, would line up. You'd be led into the test section, and then you were timed in the test section. And at the end of each day and at the end of the 2 days, your total time was accumulated for the test sections in general, and that's how you placed. So I really, really liked the Corduroy. It was 2 full days of riding, but I felt actually fairly fresh after those full 2 days of riding, because there was lots of time in between. You know, there was a little bit of socializing, you had time to grab a snack, there was lots of time to replenish and hydrate in between the test sections, and then you get into a test section and you just give her. And some of the test sections were a couple of kilometers long, some of them were 10 kilometers long. You know, some of the pros did even some longer sections, but in general, the sections were manageable, and you could really kind of hit them with everything that you had. Now again, here, I was on full moose setup, front and rear, so no worries about that. I was running a Shinko 525 cheater in the back, so a little bit more gummy, and I had an MX profile front tire, and this setup I loved. So this was it. This is the race setup. Whether it's that tire in the back or not, I don't know. I have another set of rims coming, so I'm gonna have 2 different setups, but definitely an Enduro setup with a little bit more gummy, grippy tire in the back. Both of my setups will have an MX profile front tire on them, and then one of the rear wheels will have an intermediate kind of MX focused tire on it, so I can switch back and forth from that. And then the last race of the season, and this one was a bit of a surprise, and I'm thankful for that. So I was invited to head down to Gnarden, Ontario for the Gnarden Hard Enduro. So there was, I can't remember exactly how many people, I think maybe about 30 people in total were invited to participate. You know, this area I'm not super familiar with, so forgive me if I'm inaccurate with something, but I believe they hold potentially national level trials events here. But I mean, I digress. The terrain's amazing, and you can feel the trials influence kind of through everything. You know, through the entire course. So I was in the silver class. I did not upclass the gold because I saw some of the gold sections here, and you know, they were pretty gnarly looking. So I was in the class I should have been in. Placed really well in this race, but besides that, had an absolute blast. And what a way to end the season. So, you know, Battle of Prospectors, you know, Corduroy Enduro, and then into Gnarden was an absolutely amazing way to end the season. So a bunch of friends, a bunch of good people, you know, went down and did this one. So again, same tire setup essentially as the Cord. So I was still running that Shinko on the back, which was brand new for the Cord. So it was a little bit rounded. I was going to flip it, but I didn't. But again, double moose setup, MX profile. I think I'm running a Starcross MX profile, so 8121 on the front here. And I absolutely loved the tire setup. So I think if I would have switched to get the square edges back on the grip side of the tire here, because there was a few different spots where I felt like I probably should have had the grip to get through what it was I was trying to make it through. But I mean, really, other than that, I was super happy with how I rode. I was super happy with the event. And it was just, again, a great experience overall. And I met a bunch of people here who I think I will ride with in the future and probably learn an awful lot from. So again, big trials area for, you know, all the locals and the regulars that ride here are big into trials, and obviously hard enduro, but big into that trial scene. And I have a trials bike this year, so I'm really looking forward to get down here and get some pointers and ride with these guys, because this is exactly what I want to do on my weekends. And when I ride, I want to ride this type of stuff. So this was great. Again, you know, slow in comparison to the XCs, but this is what I want to do. Second, you know, maybe third gear at the tops, but really gnarly, rooty, rocky, and this was a blast. Right, so I know I've done a lot of voiceover videos in the past, trying to interact with the audience a little bit more. I'm going to have some point of view, just regular riding footage coming up, a lot of winter riding. I'm on some studded tires right now. It's been a blast. I just wanted to recap and kind of show you the difference between all the races this year, because there's a lot of options and a lot of different types of races and a lot of different types of terrain that an individual in Ontario and Quebec can try out. So hopefully you enjoyed the video. Please subscribe. That would be great. Follow me on Instagram and look for new videos coming in the future very shortly.